Hi there everybody, welcome back. This is Alan again, and in this video we're going to see what Bootstrap is, how we can implement it in our own projects, and the main features that it offers. By the end of the video, you will realize why Bootstrap is so useful and why it makes our life so much easier while coding the front end of our applications. So let's get into it. Bootstrap is a powerful front-end framework for building responsive websites and web applications. In simpler terms, Bootstrap is like a toolbox filled with ready-to-use items for building websites. It provides pre-made pieces of code like buttons, forms, and menus that you can easily plug into your website to make it look good and work well. It also helps your website look good on different devices like phones and tablets without you having to do extra work. So Bootstrap lets you focus on the unique parts of your website while taking care of the basics for you. So to actually get started with Bootstrap, we're going to need to import a couple of files from the getbootstrap.com website. So I'm just going there and going to the documentations. Here in this part is specified that we need to import firstly a link to the Bootstrap's CSS file, and then a script tag to link to the JavaScript that Bootstrap offers. So I'm just going back to our project and I'm inputting this link tag here in our head element, just the way that we link a CSS file that we have created ourselves to our HTML page. That's just the same way we are actually linking our HTML file to this Bootstrap's file. And I'm just going back here and I'm going to copy also this script tag. And if you would want to check out what these files are that we are linking our HTML file to, let me just copy this link and put it in the browser. And basically this, what we see here is the Bootstrap's file, and I'm just gonna remove this .min part here because it just removes the white spaces and so that the page is a bit more visible. Here we can see tons of CSS code where the programmers at Bootstrap have specified different properties about the elements of the page, and mainly tons of classes that we can use in order to customize our HTML files by using what they have written here. So I'm just going back to our project here and we're gonna start seeing Bootstrap. One of the main features that Bootstrap offers is its grid system. Bootstrap's grid system is used to lay out and align content in our page, and it consists of three main sections, which are the container, the rows, and the columns. The container basically wraps the grid, and then the rows represent a single row in this grid system, and then the columns are the building blocks of this grid system, and a single row can contain up to 12 columns. To basically see how this works, I'm just gonna give a container class to a div by just this short form here. So by just writing dot, the name of the class, if I hit enter here, a div with a class of container, I've written this wrong, container is created, and this container class actually on itself just gives some padding and some styling to the content that's inside of it. So if I'm just inputting some plain text here, we will see that the text has some padding on the left and on the right, but I'm just gonna remove this text because I'm gonna input a rows and some columns inside of it. So by just adding that row here and hitting enter, I have created a div with a row class, and inside of this row we are gonna input, let's say, 3 columns, 3 divs with the column class. I'm naming this column 1. And let me just copy this, paste a few others. If I save the file, we see 3 columns in a single row, but to see this a bit clearer, let me just give a border to each of our columns. So by giving to the style attribute border to be 1 pixel, solid and black. And I'm just copying this styling for every other div. I'm saving the file, and as we can see, the single row contains 3 columns now, and each column has the same amount of space. Even if we make the screen bigger, still each column has the same amount of space, because that's actually how we have specified this. But we can define ourselves how much space we want each column to have in our row by just giving it the class that it needs to get. So by just, if I would write in the second column here, col-8, what this would do is that it would give to the second column 8 out of 12 columns of space that the row can take. And if I save the file, here we can see that the second column here has 8 out of 12 available spaces that this row has, and the other 2 columns can contain the remaining space in the same proportion. And even if I make the screen here to be bigger, this will basically be the same. The second column will take 8 out of 12 available spaces that we have here. If we would, let's say, we could just make the second column to contain half of the space by just writing col-6, because the second column will contain 6 out of 12 possible columns, and as you can see, this space here is equal to the half of the entire space that the row can have. If, let's say, one of the columns contains, like the third column contains 8 columns of space, this would be more than a single row can take, and if I save the file here, we'll see that the third column is now pushed to the second row, to the next row. Another concept that is actually important to know about Bootstrap is that Bootstrap is broken up in several different breakpoints. So basically, the programmers at Bootstrap have written some media queries where it's specific, or at certain pixel values, the styling that we apply using Bootstrap can be changed so that it's appropriate for different screens. But there are actually 6 breakpoints, which are extra small, small, medium, large, extra large, and extra, extra large. And let's say if I would want all of the columns to have the same amount of space in a single line, I would leave it as it was in the beginning. But if I would want the second column to only contain half of the space when the screen is large, I'm going to need to write here -LG for large screens, which is basically a specific screen size, and then dash the amount of space that this column will take if the screen is large. So if I save the file, here in the beginning we won't see any change, but if I start making the screen bigger, when the screen reaches this specific pixel value, so it's large, we see that the second column will contain half of the space that a row can take. And we can basically use these breakpoints for most of the styling, or for every styling that we apply to our elements. So let me just leave it firstly as it was in the beginning. And I would also want to mention here that we can offset, or we can basically separate columns with one another with specific columns of space. So let's say if I write in the second column here offset 2, what this will do is that it will leave 2 columns of space from the first column. So if I save the file, we'll see that here between the second column and the first column there are 2 columns of space. What I want to mention also is that we can actually add classes also to our row class here in the beginning, and if we would want, for example, we can specify how many columns a row can take. So if I write here the class row-cols and 2, this basically means that one row can take only up to 2 columns, and if I save the file, the third column will be pushed to the second row. And we can also use breakpoints in this case here as well. So I can change how many columns a row can take depending on the screen size. Let's say if I would want, in case the screen is extra large, I would want 30 columns in one row, I can write this piece of code here, and in the beginning, still we see that the row has only 2 columns, because that's how we specified it here. But if we make the screen extra large, it will take 3 columns. Let me make it a bit bigger. We can see here, in this case, the row contains 3 columns. And that's what basically the main things you need to know about the grid system that the Bootstrap has. So let me just remove this for now. So now we're going to talk about tables. Tables are one of the things that we'll actually customize a lot using Bootstrap. So I'm just importing a simple table here in our body. So basically a table with a head section, which contains a row inside of it, and then I think there are 3 rows here. If I just save the file here, we'll see that just by default, without adding to it any Bootstrap styling, the table doesn't look as well formatted as we would want it to be. There is no space in between the rows or columns, and the text is a bit small. How we can actually customize it using Bootstrap is by just adding a class of table in this table tag. If I just save the file, we will now see that the table looks much better. The rows and columns are separated by one another, the text is a bit bigger, and even if we make the screen to be bigger, it looks much better. Our table is also responsive in different screen sizes. Let me just make the screen small. Again, we can add different classes to customize our table. We can play around with its color by, if I just write here table dark in the class, save the file, we will see that the table now is black, and the text is automatically white. We can make our table to be stripped, which basically means that every other row will have this gray line. But actually, if we give the table the table hover class, what this basically does is a pretty nice feature that whenever we hover over each row, we see that the row is highlighted with this gray line, and we can actually make the table small. We can play around with its size by writing table-sm for small. We see the table there is a bit smaller. We can give it a class of table-large to make our table a bit larger. And if we would want to specify a specific row or to highlight a specific row or just table data, we can just give to it a class of table-active. If I save the file, we'll see that this table data here, this cell of the table, is highlighted in gray. So another important Bootstrap feature that I would like to mention is that we can actually add a scroll bar to our tables in case the tables are too big, or if they contain a lot of columns. So let's just add some columns to our table. Firstly, let me just add some headers and also some other data in the rows below. Let me even just add some more there. That's not how we would want our table to look like, and to actually solve this, we just need to wrap our entire table inside a table-responsive class, so inside the div that has this class. So if I save the file now, we should see this scroll bar that allows us to basically scroll through the data of our table, and that could be actually useful if our table really has many columns and many data in it. And that's about it about the tables. Let me just remove this for a moment. So now we are gonna see forms using Bootstrap, how we can customize forms using Bootstrap. So let me just input a simple form here in our body. So basically here I have just a form, and inside of it we have a label, an input, and a button to submit the data. If I save the file, this is basically the styling. These elements have by default, but to actually style them using Bootstrap, we're going to need to add a couple of classes to the label and the input. So if I add to our label element a class of form label, and to our input here a class of form control, we would see that the appearance of our form changes here. If we can actually just click on the form, we'll see this nice autofocus feature. The form now takes the 100% of the width of the screen, and we can actually focus on the input by just clicking here the label, and you can see this blue outline that it has. We can actually add to our forms all of the other classes that we did before. If we, let's say, disable the input, we cannot input any data in it, and there are a few different kinds of inputs that we can use. One of them, let me just make the input type to be of color, and I'm adding to this class here form control color. That's the Bootstrap class that it takes, and basically in this input here we specify a specific color that we want. There are many different input types we can use. Let me just also demonstrate how range works. We need to give it a class of form range, and basically this is basically how the range input looks like. So let me just remove this form here, and I'm gonna leave only the button that we have here, so that we will check how we can style buttons using Bootstrap. There are actually a lot of components that we can customize using Bootstrap, but I'm just focusing on the buttons right now. And as you can see, this is how a button looks by default. If I give it a class of button, which is a Bootstrap class, this is how the button would actually look like. And there are basically 3 elements that we can style with this button. Let me just give to this button a color. We can give it a color with this button -- primary class, which basically makes the button to be blue, and the text here is now, the text color is turned to white. There are actually 3 different elements that we can style with these classes that buttons take, which are also anchors and inputs. Let me just create an anchor tag here, and if you would see, if I give to this anchor tag a class of button and button primary, if I save the file, we'll see that they actually look exactly alike, even though the first one is a button and the second one is just an anchor. And also inputs can take the button classes, and if I give to this input a class of button primary, I'm giving it a value of submit, we'll see that the styling is basically the same, even though it's a bit bigger. The input, we can also just make just like we gave to our anchor a button style, we can give to the button an anchor style by just writing this button link class to our button. Our button now basically looks like a link. There are different kinds of classes we can give to our buttons. We can write this, we can make our buttons to be small or large by giving this button dash small class, or large. We can actually change the class here to that gives our button a color to make it button dash outline primary. So whenever we hover over this button now, it gets the blue color. And these were some of the stylings we can give to buttons in Bootstrap. So this was the introduction to the Bootstrap basics, how it works, and some of the main things you can do using Bootstrap. Bootstrap also offers many utility and helper classes that you can use, but I did not want to make the video too long, so I would highly recommend for you to go to the documentation and check yourself for whatever you need. I hope you found the video helpful, and if you did so, please do subscribe to the channel and give the video a like. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.